now. There you go. Hello, everyone. So welcome back to the final live session for this lab on open badges. Especially on badges and informal learning. So because we've done so much work and because it's the end of the semester for many people, I'm guessing that this lab session will be even more informal than it was, especially since we don't necessarily have to introduce ourselves and many of the issues have been discussed. But maybe we can still go around the table a little bit and see if there's any announcement, anything that came up in the meantime since the last lab. So, James, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, my name is James Willis. I'm at Indiana University. I work with Dan Hickey on open digital badges. And at the last meeting, we were actually in the offices of edX in Boston. And since then, we have badges that are successfully deployed through the Open edX platform. So that's kind of our update at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Geneviève?
Geneviève Rock from Champlain College. We're working on a pilot project to work with businesses to issue badges for the IT field.
Cool. Great. Erin?
Hello, my name is Erin Fields. I'm with the University of British Columbia, and we are working on a pilot project to implement badges in both curricular and co-curricular courses. One of the programs has been complete, and it was a wild success. So
nice.
we're pretty happy about the numbers that we've had on that so far.
Oh, what kind of numbers?
In terms, the pilot project was looking at trying to increase participation in an online course that didn't have anything to do with the marks, but posts and blogs and comments to try and create participation and partnership. And on the first few weeks, we ended up with, I think, a 250% increase in comments. From a comparative time period, and that seems to have been proven across right to the end of the semester. So we haven't crunched all the numbers yet. Right now we're working on a survey to discuss that, but yes, very successful.
Yeah, when there's a slight increase, it's kind of hard to say, oh, is it something else, whatever reason, the Harton effect, whatever it is. But when it's that significant, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Don?
Yes, Don Prezant from Manitoba. I am with a company called Learning Agents, an advocate for badges. Most recently, I've started a project for George Brown College, taking their digital badge program to an open badge environment, and I'm in discussions with a Canadian university to do something similar.
Nice, nice. Dan?
I'm Dan Hickam at Indiana University, and I'm just wrapping up the Design Principles Documentation project of the 29 projects awarded in 2012, and just launching the Badge Kit and Beyond, promoting digital badges across higher education and working with James and others. Thanks.
Nice, nice. Charles?
Yeah, Charles Tai with Ashoka Canada. So we're focused on badges in the social innovation space, and we are starting to think about taking a group of organizations through a process that is facilitated by McConnell Foundation to think through common agenda and common metrics that we can commit to. So that will be something that we will undertake in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, I'm working on helping Adobe create their new direct-to-youth platform to help young people become media makers and change makers. So really thinking through the change-making curriculum that's part of that platform, and what kind of digital badges we should issue for achievements and for learning that young people gain through that platform.
Great, great. April?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. I'm having some technical difficulties. That's April Moore, Corona-Norco Unified School District. We're in Southern California, and we are issuing badges to all 54,000 of our students, K-12, for a variety of achievements both in school and outside of school, and are expanding now to community badges, working with our community partners.
Great, great. So that's a quick, rundown. But so the first thing I wanted to do is to go back to the assignments that we had given the last time. And of course, I'm not expecting that most people have done it, but at least Don has put in a few comments about his own assignment, so that's pretty useful. And in the meantime, if other people can write anything about the homework, whether you've done it or not, and I see that there's someone who's possibly doing so. But maybe, Don, you can talk a little bit about your tale from New York, because I think it can help us to broaden the discussion a little bit.
Okay, so apologies to the Pogues for the title of this. So it's a riff off Fairy Tale of New York, and it's on page, is it 10 now? Yeah, 10 of 11, I guess, in the collaborative document. And essentially, this is just me, I guess, inspired by Erin's use case that she put down there, is to say, from my point of view, which has having to do with adult education and employability and stuff that's out in the community, but probably more employer-focused. How could this play out? And basically, it's to say that what if a group of employers in a community decided they wanted to do something, and they wanted to do what the Manufacturing Institute is saying it's doing, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says should happen, is to reverse the supply and demand and start demanding skills and certifications for when people come to them, and basically take a leadership mode in that, and to say that open badges could be an enabler for that. So the idea would be to come up with a common language of the skills that they all need, maybe have a core element that everybody would be interested in, and then domain-specific skills that would be needed in particular sectors, and then to implement that on a community basis, working with post-secondaries. And as I say, I was inspired a little bit by the Manufacturing Institute with this, and there's a video somewhere that I think it's a Badge Alliance online presentation, where the person in charge of Manufacturing Institute is talking about this demand pipeline they're setting up, and how the Manufacturing Institute is basically setting a curriculum and getting colleges to align themselves to that curriculum, to say that we will then say these people are employment ready. So it's to say, what if a group of employers did that in a small to medium-sized city? What could the impact, how would it work, what could the impact be? So I've made it a fairy tale, which ends up with them swallowing up an adjacent municipality.
That might be a bit much.
What is the video you're referring to, Don?
Pardon me?
Ask, what is the video that you are referring to?
Yeah.
I'll see if I can dig it up. It's just, I forget the woman's name in charge of the Manufacturing Institute, but basically she's talking through some slides and talking about, what do they call it? Am I ready? Or something like that. And it's basically, it's a set of criteria, a set of skills and competencies that they're saying they want American colleges to align themselves to. And a number of American colleges have stepped up and said they are MI ready, or have been accredited as MI ready. So I'll see if I can dig that up for you, Dan.
Because their badge system was one of the badge systems that we studied in our project, and it was the one that we actually cite often as the having the chicken and egg problem. That you know, the colleges say, well, we want to see, you know, earners with these badges, and the potential vocational issuers say we want to see colleges who will accept them. So I'm curious as to what's happening now, because certainly in the context of their MacArthur Award, they were sort of unable to make as much progress as they had hoped to in that regard.
And that's a frustration, I think, and they're certainly not responding very well to inquiries. So this is a several months old video, and as I say, it's perhaps they're pursuing something outside of the open badge area. But there's that, but there's also this U.S. Chamber of Commerce demand pipeline report that's come out. So I'll try and dig both of those up and pop those out.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that Geneviève has some things to say about it. Since we had the technical difficulties before, that might be a good time to say a little bit about how it would fit that the college can actually take part in that kind of pipelines, right?
Well, this is quite interesting. We're working with the rail industry, and the question that this raises is industry or are industry groups all of a sudden going to start setting the standards in a new way for the colleges? So if industry is able to get together and say this is what we need from graduates, and I think that's what you're talking about, Don, that's what happened with the manufacturing industry. So now and I can see the industry is taking control, saying these are the standards we want, these are the skills we want, and those could be represented by badges. And I think academics would be very resistant to that kind of model where the colleges are forced to either join in or their graduates are not accepted. But right now the rail industry is already doing that a little bit in Canada, and we're working with them to see if they can come up with a model.
Nice. And Charles, I know you've been involved in things a little bit similar to that. Maybe it's difficult to get with educational institutions, but to have this kind of a pipeline.
And Don was on the community call yesterday that I was on, and I think I raised a concern that I would like to raise with him, with his fairy tale. And I can see where it might go wrong, which is that relationships are formed between institutions, that people don't often see, and so the Manufacturing Institute might give preferential treatment, to certain designated institutions and their badges, and there might even there might even be fees involved in the sort of endorsement or recognition of those badges, and so it even though badges are used, it may still remain a fairly closed system where there are certain ways that there's certain institutions that people have to jump through to get to those jobs, and it would be difficult for someone who may not have gone through those institutional hoops to say, I have those skills and this is how I can demonstrate those skills, which is, for me, part of the ideal of open badges is that there can be many more ways that those competencies can be demonstrated, and for the earner to construct that story for themselves, and somehow technology would support that construction of narrative rather than trading on institutional reputation. So I'm wondering how whether you see that. To me, that's a very realistic scenario, that we're very used to these institutional relationships being formed, and I'll do you a favor, you do me a favor, that kind of thing, and it remains a fairly closed system depending on what relationships exist between these power centers.
Right. I guess my first answer is that I think the danger is real, and I see it already in the U.S. Chamber document that I've already dumped into the collaborative document, because they're talking about having particular institutions upstream in their pipeline that will be the approved institutions. There's no mention of badges in their vision right now, so it's right in the center of what you're worried about. I come to open badges from the direction of portfolios, and initially from the direction of recognition of prior learning. And I was at a conference in Canada, in the Capital Conference in Ottawa, and presenting about open badges and the recognition of prior learning. But somebody else who was there, as a major employer, Civil Service Commission from Manitoba, was there presenting about barrier-free recognition of learning as a workforce development strategy. And that's something I'm very much aligned with. And basically, I think the key phrase in that is "or equivalent." So if they start saying you have to have this particular education, if you can stick in that phrase or equivalent, then you've got essentially something where you can have the alternatives. So, and it comes down to that pathway notion, where is it as Serge was saying yesterday in the community call, is it a prescribed pathway, or are there alternate pathways, much like the internet, where when one node is down, it finds another path through. Okay, so that's we're on the same page with that. I think what we have here is, and essentially, it's an agnostic system, and it can be used in a number of different ways, and it's there are going to be a lot of social forces at play in this. Let's see if I can find the second notion.
And to kind of bring it back to educational institutions, I'm wondering if either Aaron or April has something to say from the point of view of how the connection can be. It might be especially difficult with K through 12, which is not vocational, but even then, or in universities, how people react to this kind of connection between industry and education.
I can say from the university, since there's a lot of kind of reticence around it. Mm-hmm. There is a big interest in it because part of the project that we developed, one of the individuals is very much into enterprise learning, etc. So his focus has a lot of conversation about the badges would have more value and worth should they be kind of approved via Microsoft or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I do see some areas there that make sense. Also, we have through our business school, they are very much in tune with industry. And there is a definite interest from them as well as doing that sort of cross-partnership. So there is, but on a larger scale, because it's kind of that crossover of public education and privatization of education, and then how that connects in terms of cost recoveries, etc., that it becomes kind of a tense situation. But where I see opportunity is when we talk about schools that are accredited via external parties. So if you become a teacher, you have to be accredited outside after you've got your degree by whichever body, depending on what province you're in, or etc. Or we have the same thing that comes like with midwifery or nursing or medicine or social work or etc. The possibility of creating badging programs that kind of address not just what's happening in the classroom, but the sort of middle ground between getting your degree and getting accredited, there's huge opportunity on that in between. And I think that might be a soft way by getting people comfortable with the notion of industry, although I guess it's not industry in this sense, but it sort of is. Getting them becoming comfortable with that notion of there being a cross-partnership.
Yeah, that makes sense. And April, I don't know that much about the connections between like high school and industry, but maybe there's something there.
Yes, in the U.S. right now, there's a huge push for college and career readiness, and we feel like we've done the college part very, very well in K-12, and less so career. And then there's that drive to quantify. We're all about data and data-driven decision-making. How do you quantify a student ready for careers? And we're looking at badges and pathways of badges in industry sectors as a way of doing that, and building that into our dashboard of data that we use, and use it also as that motivating factor for students to see their pathway towards a career and to help choose those pathways of badges that they're earning. And so when we rolled out this past October, we rolled out our badging initiative to 150 business partners in our district. They were very, very excited, and since then I've been meeting with business partners and community organizations about our expansion of badging beyond the school district to include community partners. One of the ones we just met with this week is our local fire department, and they have a goal of doing CPR certification, or sorry, training, not certification, so the 8-hour certification that you may go to various organizations for, but they're seeing a goal of a 2-hour training that still saves lives and trains quite a few people. So they're going to be coming into the schools or partnering with our schools to host events. And then they'll be issuing badges because there's not a certification card that comes with this particular training, but they want to issue a badge or some kind of a credential recognizing that this person, whether it's a student or community parent, anyone, has been trained. And so that's just one example kind of outside of the school system, but we're partnering with quite a few. We actually met a few weeks ago with Cisco. They have more formalized learning environments in the K-12 system for students that end in certifications, but they're looking at also partnering with us in our badging initiative. So first we have to put in the curriculum and get those pathways in place, but that will be simultaneous with our badging. So very much a lot of potential.
And April, the teachers are not too concerned about things like that? They don't feel it's moving away from their core goal of college preparedness?
There's mixed feelings, but the teachers ultimately have felt for a while that not 100% of our students go on to college. So what are we doing for all students? And so this is they're feeling more that it's a balanced approach, that we're preparing students to be eligible for college and to have that choice, and we want to have that basic non-negotiable access for all. But some students may opt out, and we want to be able to support them towards that career. And with our new accountability structures coming in place in the U.S., that's becoming a bigger, more important effort to quantify how are we doing that? How can we prove that we're preparing them for career opportunities?
And speaking of college, maybe, Geneviève, you can describe a little bit the way you see it, because as people should know by now, colleges in Quebec are between university and high school. And in this case, it can be vocational. So I'm pretty sure there's some discussion that already has happened with the RAC at Champlain, right?
Yeah, most of our work is done with vocational studies people, and I thought it was interesting from Ashoka, I think, Canada. You were saying you want people to be, I think what you're saying is that you don't want you don't think educational institutions should have the monopoly on recognition of people. Recognition should be coming from anywhere. And I think a first step towards that is to have colleges be able to recognize people through recognition of acquired competencies, not through traditional credentials. So people can just come in, show us what they can do, we evaluate them, recognize it, we can issue the badge. But I think the next step is for those individuals to just do their work and have their employer issue the exact same badge, and potentially we can imagine other scenarios where even a community of experts could recognize the same badge. And I think I'm hijacking the discussion a little bit in that direction, but I'd like to know what people feel about this.
I'd like to chime in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an assessment researcher. I've devoted most of my career to using assessment to inform practice. But one of the concerns I have about assessment is that when you transform disciplinary knowledge, especially the practices of a discipline that underlie proficiency, this sort of highly contextualized sort of practical wisdom, when you attempt to represent that knowledge in any sort of a formal assessment, especially one that has high stakes attached to it, and important consequence for learners, you really are distorting that knowledge. It's a peculiar, if not bizarre, representation of what it means to know something, especially if you're forced to put it into some sort of selected response assessment. So I've always had a big concern with that challenge in competency-based instruction. I wonder a lot when I see that. I also have a concern. I mean, so that's one concern I have about, really radically competency-based approaches, because it's my opinion that an assessment is an echo of what it means to be proficient. It's not. It can in most disciplines. Any assessment that can be scored reliably and quickly is very, very shallow and limited impression of what it means to be competent in that field. I also worry in competency-based approaches that there's so much learning that happens in a classroom that is not represented on an assessment, and that allowing someone to get credit for something simply because they have taken a test and pretend that someone who gets a passing score on a test knows as much about any domain. I mean, I would propose that if you give a valid assessment for a particular course and that person completes a formal course of instruction, that someone else who passes that test who didn't take that course of instruction, that person probably knows. The person who took the course probably does know quite a bit more than the person who simply passed the test. And I think that equating them is a risky endeavor.
James, maybe if you can chime in as to the abstractness of the assessment.
Sure, yeah. I mean, whenever we talk about competency-based education, we're talking about so-called real-world skills. And there seems to be sort of a tension in education between the abstraction of knowledge and the quantification of knowledge, we might say. And I think badges kind of run that same tension. And as it plays out, and we, it's kind of a catch-all phrase now to talk about the democratization of education and having these enormous LMSs like edX, that just blast open learning opportunities to people worldwide, or at least those that have an internet connection. And badges have, I think, an integral part in that. But we also have to be careful about, in terms of assessments and what an expert is, and with this kind of top-down approach, and are we still mitigating the same concerns that were present in say, the industrial age, of being able to say what is and what is not with these very defined terms. And I think that badges represent kind of the opportunity to redefine that in our own time.
But maybe, Don, you have a perspective from the point of view of recognition of prior learning that it can be pretty concrete in some cases, right?
Yes, it can be concrete, and one of the things I do is I when I have discussions about recognition of prior learning in the workforce, I try and say, well, you're already doing it. This is just providing you with a framework for doing it in a way that's maybe a little more repeatable. And the note I just put in there, I mean, ultimately, there has to be some value to these badges. And who is going to recognize those badges? Well, it has to be employers, ultimately. So they have to somehow be part of the conversation, and they have to be brought to recognizing the value of the badges. And maybe that starts with them discussing how modular recognition from post-secondary institutions, which is the thing they're most familiar with, and or training can be recognized, and moving on from there. And then pulling in over time other ways of demonstrating learning. And certainly there are discussions underway in, strangely enough, in the public sector in Canada about how to do this, and how you can use badges for things like being assigned to new work, or pulling a team together, or recognizing informal learning in the workplace. And they actually have a strategy underway, a government-wide strategy that they're calling Blueprint 2020. Mm-hmm. And badges are starting to be folded into that, along with things like open source, open resources, and informal learning, and things of that nature. So yeah, you have to get their attention. You have to start people with what is going to hopefully help solve their problems now, rather than try and move their heads to where you want them to go, where they might end up 3 years from now. That's my feeling about it anyway.
I do think, though, that this is where some of the tensions do exist in terms of academic institutions, at least universities, because the notion of university education has changed so drastically over time from more of a liberal arts grand learning on a kind of Aristotelian sort of scale now to there being a mixture, right, of education for a job. So there are social work schools, there are nursing schools, there's medical schools, etc. The problem is that I think some of the new technologies that have come out, and we've seen it with MOOCs, we've seen it with open badges, that it's seen as a kind of thing that can be applied across the board to all things. When we're talking about open badges here, we're talking about very specific skill sets that can be badged, which I may agree with, but how do you badge, say, something that is like critical thinking or critical evaluation, or how do you badge that you do have said certain skill sets that are just so difficult because they are so integrated to so many other different types of skill sets. So I guess that's where it sort of falls in here, is that there's not something that can kind of address the all. So how do we make sure that some aspects of the education that's happening here in an academic institution is badged, and there's recognition of those badges in the actual courses and programs, and that maybe externally, but maybe it doesn't really work with the other areas? How do you kind of balance those two things?
So Geneviève, I'm interested in your perspective on recruitment, because especially you know the Quebec system and the Quebec context, which is pretty important for our core constituency. So.
Can I do a brief aside first on
Sure.
the idea? Okay, I think we work here. I work with people to create competency-based assessment. So to me, I'm very familiar with the notion of taking traditional material that a teacher has done for 60 hours with people sitting in his or her classroom and transforming it into which competency is supposed to be being developed in that classroom, because the whole educational system in Quebec is supposed to be competency-based, yet a lot of teachers from previous generations are still teaching a course that is not necessarily linked to the competency they're supposed to be linking it with. So I see these really interesting and fascinating tensions happen all the time, and a lot of teachers still say the content of my course and the fact that people are sitting in my classroom for 60 hours means that they are learning more, that they are doing more. And when people say that, I seriously question that, and I say, you're telling me that someone who's worked in the field, has had a life, has done critical thinking for 15 years in the field, cannot potentially have that competency because they weren't sitting on the bench for 60 hours. And I think our challenge is not as much to worry about the special experience that happens when you sit on that chair in the classroom context for 60 hours, but it's more to define what should be being built by sitting in that classroom. Is it critical thinking? Well, critical thinking is being evaluated all the time by educational institutions. Teachers evaluate it, so others can evaluate it as well. Teachers don't have the monopoly of the evaluation of critical thinking because they are in educational institutions. So I think if we put that in context, I think we're going to come to the same kind of tension with badges. Why should employers, why should orders, why should outside organizations be able to grant a badge? But if we do get there, I think the badges, and I think that was being hinted at before or discussed before, badges have the potential to become that common language for everyone to be able to start opening on a discussion on what does it mean to think critically, and can we all agree that critical thinking at this level is this, and stop doubling up assessments of things between institutions, employers, so the employer who wants to recruit could trust the badges and not reassess the people.
And from my perspective, what I hear the most, at least in Quebec, is not so much about critical thinking for employers. I don't know that they're that concerned about critical thinking most of the time, but these days they're really thinking a lot about innovation. So I'm wondering if Charles has some things to say about how Ashoka recognizes innovation and if it works. Charles?
Process that they have refined over the last 30 years, to assess whether someone should be an Ashoka Fellow and whether they are, for example, a leading social entrepreneur. or whether they have, what would be considered a new idea, rather than just a new instance of an old idea. So it is a very complex thing, and I think what I look for is sort of like a pattern, right? This is where collections of badges come into play, and not any individual badge. It's whether there's that mindset and tendency that has surfaced over time, in different ways, and that becomes the larger story of whether this person is someone we would call entrepreneurial or innovative. It's hard to just tell from one instance of a badge. It is that larger story, and this is why like I really recommend that the young people I talk to always think about passion projects and side projects that they can pursue, even if they are going through some sort of formal education, because very often it's those self-initiated work that says more about you and what you're passionate about and what you're capable of than any formal recognition. So I think it is, this is where I think being able to assess batch collections, will be very important for us, and knowing that there will be these badges that will be very sought after, very influential, and very in demand. They. Yesterday in the community call, we brought up the, in the chat, we brought up the idea: will there be, sort of influence scores like clout, associated with badges in the future, where people can see how influential and powerful a certain badge is, and maybe that there will be, but I think for us, we want to look at that larger pattern.
And actually, because we're talking about Blueprint 2020, I'll try to add Valerie Thomas, who works at the federal level, and it might be interesting to have her chime in about this if she can join in. So I'm trying this to add someone in midway, and that's kind of testing my luck if it works. But if it does work, it would be great to have her chime in as to how it works at the federal level. For Blueprint 2020, if you don't know, the way I understand it, but maybe Don, you can expand a little bit before Valerie gets in, if she does, is that it is actually about innovation in the public sector, right? So
right.
Don, yeah.
It's about a way forward for the public sector to be more open, to be more collegial, to be more cross-departmental, to be sort of all hands on deck rather than saying, oh, that's not us, that's people over there, and to deal with change as a way of living, way of life. That's off the top of my head. I'll see if I can dig up something better.
And what's I'm actually, my partner is at the federal government, and we've been talking a little bit about Blueprint 2020. I think public servants these days are a little bit worried about how they're being not only perceived but also assessed, and because there's been a number of cuts. So that's part of the context a little bit. I say it partly because I say these things partly because I want them to be documented in a way. So I think it's useful to see that. I don't see Valerie come in. I invited her into two different addresses. But actually, maybe in the meantime, we can go back to the other two people who talked about the assignment. And Avery will come in a few minutes. I'll invite him as well. And just to say, actually, I'll invite him now, and then I'll mention a few things just about Brenda, who really does deserve the badge for this lab, because she's done all the work that was required. So that's something. So as I'm inviting Avery hoping that it works. Again, I'm testing my luck, as we say in French. I'm tempting the devil. So anything that can go wrong might go wrong at this point. But Brenda has been talking about the usefulness of in her learning process, because she's talking about establishing badges for Women's Studies and Gender Relations certificate, and the fact that even just thinking about those, she's putting a smiley in the document. Even thinking about those, this homework and going through it a bit, it's a process. It's not meant to be done just in a few minutes, but that it's been possible to go a little bit deeper into what it means and seeing the users in a different way. So seeing the platform itself, Brenda had talked about the fact that Moodle is kind of challenging in terms of user interface and so on. And actually, we've interacted before. Moodle is implemented in many CEGEPs across the province. But at the same time, it's likely that it will be used for this project because okay, I'll try to send Avery the invitation again because it's not working. But it's likely that Moodle will be used because that's what they use over there, and it's probably just easier like that. So I'll send another invitation to Avery at the same time, so I'm multitasking, and during that time, I'm just trying to connect to a few things. Geneviève, did you have a chance to watch what happened in the French lab since the last time?
Since yesterday, no.
No, okay. Or anything that you wanted to add from the other side?
Not right now. I'm actually, if there's a little bit of a dead moment, I'd like to ask a question to the other panel participants. How do you see evidence? I think evidence might eventually play an important role in badges, and we've been researching technically how people could attach evidence from work they've done. And I think, Don, you had a project where people could attach evidence to their badges. I don't know if other people had that concrete evidence of their realizations.
I can reply to that just to say that right now the tool I'm using, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry. The tool I'm using right now is something called Open Badge Factory, and there's an option there when you receive a badge to attach evidence to it. The evidence can be a document you'd upload or a link, etc., or it could be the actual application for the badge that you were awarded. And I'm going to pass now over to Val Thomas.
Good timing.
Val.
Hey, thanks. So yes, I'm jumping into this conversation a little late, so I apologize. I was kind of doing a couple things at once, but I did catch the mention of the concept of Blueprint 2020. And essentially what we're doing in the government here, we're piloting the potential of using open badges as a means for recognition. So we're looking to sort of pilot it tied to Blueprint 2020, which is under talent development. So being able to become an agile workforce of the 21st century, we need to be able to recognize what, the talents of the people in the workforce that we have and be able to uncover that knowledge, if you will. And badges have a huge potential of being able to do that. So we have done a very small pilot using open badges for awards and recognition for the innovation category. That's something that we used actually using Open Badge Factory. So we created the badge and we issued that. And that worked quite well at a small scale. We don't have a full sort of operational structure yet, but that's something that we are working towards. And also looking for the opportunity to start attaching for informal learning, because that's really where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, which is harnessing all of the informal learning that is currently taking place and providing people with those markers and those badges to be able to get recognized for those achievements. So that's sort of what I've been sort of doing the past little bit. I don't know if there's any specific questions I might be able to help with that. But I know that it's a huge undertaking. We're using the initiative under Blueprint 2020. I'm actually part of an innovation team here at NRCan, so we're given a little bit of freedom. But as you know, working for the government is definitely a big infrastructure. There's a lot of hurdles and barriers, but we're taking it one step at a time. And things that we're very interested in is also the concept of mapping competencies. So taking these badges and feeding them back up to what people understand as competencies.
And actually, because we've talked about, well, we're talking about the full ecosystem, and we've talked about tensions when educational institutions are gearing their training towards industry. But in terms of the public service, I'm guessing that the tension is probably also there, but very different, no?
Yeah, it's sort of the fundamental question of what do you badge? And that's really, I think, the question for anyone embarking upon using open badges for credentialing knowledge or skills and so forth. It's like, what do you badge, and what are the systems in which you are measuring that assessment? So there's definitely a lot of questions surrounding moving forward. That's why we're just trying to break off little pieces and learning from best practices.
And just because, well, you know, we're connected with the public sector in this household, so just thinking about what it means when people are hired by the public service, it's not just as an employee, it's also, you know, being part of society in a different way. So the federal government is pushing a new type of employee, trying to create a new a new approach to the skills that are important in some ways?
I mean, I can only speak for the pilot that we're trying to implement, but I would love to say, as part of a bigger vision, I would say that it's extremely important to be able to identify the skills and the talent and the knowledge that we have amongst us as, you know, federal public service, of how many tens of thousands of unique individuals across the country, and being able to harness the knowledge that they have and all of the learning that they're acquiring and be able to tap into that, I think, is a huge opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah, very interesting. Yeah. I insist because, you know, I try to make things connected to our core constituency, which is, you know, the CEGEP system in Quebec, and I think it's really relevant. And also to transition back to Avery, who is online, and we're testing the microphone. So if you can talk a little bit about what you've been up to. We're not hearing you yet. So I hope it works. Hello? Maybe not. So Erin, I know you have to leave. Any parting words?
Oh gosh, no, I don't.
The
Sorry, but
fine.
this has been very interesting. So I'll catch the rest of it from the recording.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
Bye.
And the part of the reason I'm asking this is that I do want people to come out of this lab with something. So we will spend some time talking about some recommendations you might have for people. We've talked about many issues, but I think at one point it might be useful to have some either advice or just suggestions as to what can be done next.
I'd like to pose a question. Hi, Val. This is Dan Hickey from Indiana University. We've been involved in a whole bunch of aspects of this badging effort. One of the discussions we were having before you joined was one I'll just pose to you, and that is that, you know, what makes badges fundamentally different from other forms of credential is that they do contain, or they can contain, specific claims and evidence supporting those claims. So, for example, in my own courses, where I had a small, nimble learning management system of Google Course Builder, I was able to basically make it possible for learners to include everything that they did in my course, all of the artifacts that they produced, all of the promotions that their peers said about their work. When they issued their badge, they were able to choose to include all of that information in the badge if they wanted to. last week we've just got badges up and running in the edX platform, and that, like most LMSs, you can't point back to the work that someone did in the LMS in public because it's password protected. And so in that case, our colleagues engineered an interesting workaround, and that is that because it's computer science, the students can put the URL to the they can deposit their code in a GitHub account and point to it. So my question to you is in your setting, what sorts of how are you guys thinking about including evidence in digital badges? I mean, if it's not a direct, if it's a directly accessible competency, you still need some way of representing that competency digitally so it can be linked to a badge.
Hello.
Avery, just we do hear you, and there's a few noises as well, but I'll let Valerie answer.
Yeah, so I think that's a very excellent question, and I think that's really fundamental to what open badges are, and it's having that verification tied to the credential. Otherwise, it doesn't really have that value and merit. So we're basically we're taking off what we call achievable steps forward, and for us, we piloted the Departmental Innovation Award as an example because it already had that assessment body attached to it. So there's already part of the human resources, they review applications, people would have just received a paper certificate for achieving that. So we knew that assessment criteria had already been established, and we just applied an open badge to that. So that was kind of an easy transition for us. But leading into things like informal learning, you're absolutely correct. And this is where the second phase of attaching open badges to informal learning is going to take a lot of planning to know how are we exactly going to document and verify this assessment of learning. And that's where the question of what do we badge is going to be definitely coming into play. We have a lot of informal learning structures here at my department, and one of them being communities of practice. So, for example, I'm part of the video community of practice, where we teach practitioners how to use, video technology and so forth. So to badge something like that would need to be structured by evidence, by saying, this person was able to produce X amount of videos, here's the link to it, so you can actually verify that somebody has indeed followed that kind of structured path. So that's how we're sort of thinking about how we would start to apply, but that's contained within what we control as knowledge and information. If people are getting information outside, that's where we'll need to think about how we're going to verify that.
Much of this has been about formal stuff in some ways, in skills and things like that, because Avery designs games, and I think it's an interesting context to bring him in.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Avery. Unfortunately, you can't see my face, or maybe fortunately, I'm not sure how that works. I work at a Forden studio. I'm one of the co-founders, and we make serious games. And I'm also a second language teacher at Vanier College, so I kind of work in both worlds. Serious games, if you don't know what they are, they're any game that has a goal other than just pure entertainment. For instance, we're making a second language game where you negotiate with a partner out loud and synchronously in order to learn how to speak on the telephone and speak face-to-face. So it's a way of taking a game dynamic and applying it to a skill that you would need outside, and negotiating obviously would be a skill that you would need for second language learning, as well as speaking on the phone and speaking face-to-face. So we've been making this game for a little bit more than about 8 months. We've been testing it. The testing has gone really well. We're now setting up a way to sell it, distribute it, and all that stuff. And for us, in terms of badging, we see the serious games as a wonderful catalyst for badges because they are skills. You can demonstrate your skills within the game. Obviously, the game has to be built well. Obviously, the game has to be used correctly. But if those things are taken care of, and that's what our job is. Once you have those built, then you can really show how well you have mastered a certain skill, and from there you can then use that demonstrable skill to either get a badge or to get a job or what have you. There's a big difference between knowing a grammar rule and saying, yes, I know how to write a question, or I know how to fill in the blank for a vocabulary word or for a grammar word, but it's very different saying I know how to negotiate in a second language effectively, and in fact I've won a certain game and I've beaten these certain people, and this is what my skill level is in that game. So we're really excited about badges, we're really excited about serious games, and we're really excited about this this webinar, which has been going great. So thank you so much, Alex.
Well, and by the way, we tend to call it a lab more than a webinar because it's less about. No, that's fine. That's fine. Just that there are other partners in the CJEP system that that do more webinars. But I think it's interesting to go back also to, even with the ecosystem itself, that the games are in view of something, even though it's more about informal skills or things that typically are not taught step by step. It's more something that people develop on their own. So Avery, if you can talk a little bit about how it fits in the fuller ecosystem, like people who get hired to negotiate afterwards, for instance.
So the idea is very, very simple. It's not only is the game very fun, but it is also a skill that you need to master. So the idea would be, when you play this game inside of the classroom or at home through an audio chat, you can negotiate with a lot of different people. So those could be other students, those could be teachers, evaluators, and those also can be native speakers. So we're setting up a whole system of badges to account for your success, your skills, your strengths, and even your weaknesses within those different interactions, so that at the end we get a very complete picture of who you are as a speaking second language learner. We can also design badges and games for writing and reading and listening and what have you, but this game is specifically targeted to speaking. So you get a very complete picture of the student at the end. And the awesome part and the really amazing part is that it's also really fun to undertake these negotiations. So it kind of covers both worlds, and we're excited about it, but there's still a lot of work ahead, as you can all imagine.
And I'm wondering, April, is this something that, based on what you know about your students in your school district, if they'd be interested in something a little bit like that? Because we're talking about the impact games have, especially on boys in your school district.
Oh, absolutely. We haven't gotten into the game design feature, so we're doing more, outside of technology, earning the badge and then receiving it digitally. But that's fascinating, and Avery, as that it's developed, we'd be very, very interested in piloting and exploring that type of a game. It sounds perfect.
And you had mentioned that it was especially boys who were interested, right? But girls are also into gaming.
Oh, absolutely. It's not only one gender. We just find that the boys are highly, highly motivated by the badge. In fact, I think I shared at a previous lab that they want to earn any badge. Any badge that's available, they want it. It doesn't matter. Where the girls are more selective, well, I'd like to earn a badge on this subject or that subject, or for following this rule or that, those kinds of things is where they're thinking of badges. They all enjoyed the badges quite a bit. In fact, I think we had a 94% rate of students being highly motivated by badging in general, and that was, equal amount of girls and boys in that. But it's just the boys that are kind of over the top. If there's a badge, they want it.
What's interesting, though, is that it ties in between motivation that has been a topic through the lab as a whole, but especially the first session, and also pathways that we discussed the second session, like last month, within the whole thing that you can be motivated for different reasons, but also you have different purposes in acquiring those badges, and you can have your own pathway, as Don was describing with the workbook, that you can in fact have your own pathway. And even in terms of design, there's been a mention, if I remember correctly, that some people might even want to have certain badges in terms of how they design and to complete their profile. I think there's something about even the collecting mentality in there. I think that's interesting. I do want to mention a couple of things before we'll start wrapping up in just a few minutes, because I do want us to talk about further issues. The issue of community use of practice is especially relevant for this lab session, and I think it can help us to basically move on to the future of after the lab, what can be done. One thing is that one participant who's in Australia, like Kim is at the same university at Curtin, has been developing a badging project and actually a badge research project. So I put her answer to the homework. It wasn't specifically about the homework, but because she couldn't necessarily be in real time with us this afternoon or tonight for her. As far as I know, she created a screencast about her project that's actually very detailed, and even though it's about a girls' school for, as far as I remember, elementary school, I think it's really relevant to think about all those issues that she thought about to design not only the badges, but actually a passport, which has been a broader issue that was mentioned last time, that the space where we put the badges together can also be an outcome of the badging process. It's not just the badges individually, it's also that we can have a place, like Erin was saying, UBC could have a UBC branded backpack, so to speak. So thinking of passports, it's actually an issue that people discussed in the French lab, so I think it's relevant to have that, and it's useful to document it a little bit. And also just by chance, I was talking with someone at one CEGEP yesterday who's developing possibly, applying for funding for a project that has to do with tutorials that would help either nurses or engineers, so students in either nursing or engineering programs, who kind of have some needs. Either for nurses it's about biology, and for engineers it's about math. And in both cases, it's not about having a full remedial course, it's really about having a few things that you need to really understand before you move on. So you need specific training. And in this case, having grades and such is less important than showing the achievement itself. So the pathways themselves, as Val is saying in the chat, is extremely interesting there, extremely important. So I mention it because it's in the CEGEP, and it's specifically related to two programs that do exist, so it's formal in that sense, but it's also a more informal way to go at it than having an actual course. It's really like a little bit of modules that people can take to just catch up and go on with the material. In both cases, what's interesting is that not only are they vocational programs, both nurses and engineers, but it's also, in both cases, they have professional orders. So maybe, Geneviève, if you don't mind, if you can talk a little bit, it was underlining a few things you said earlier, but about the relationship with professional orders. Like, I'm pretty sure there are some things that you do at Champlain that have to do with nurses or something like that.
Actually, I'm not going to talk about it. Because the relationship in Quebec between professional orders and recognition of informal learning is filled with tensions and political issues. So I'm just going to stay out of that conversation for now and let other people comment.
So anyone else who had some experience with professional orders? Maybe Don?
Just to say that the one example that pops into my mind is the one linked to Cardiff University, where health professionals are doing an experiment with badging workshops and learning having to do with pain management, the management of pain. So it's just a very small scale experiment, but the notion of continuing competence, I think, is there. The other one that pops into my mind is lab technologists. There's, I think it might be a credit trust or one of those things is now badging a particular form of learning professional learning having to do with medical lab technologists, and I think quality in systems. So in other words, evaluation of systems. I can dig that up if I look for it.
Okay.
I think it's happening.
Yeah. Oh, I now have, okay. Funnily enough, Google Talk is asking me to update. It's exactly the right time, obviously. I was wondering, Val, if you have any relationship with professional orders in the public service, like for natural resources?
Not personally that I've had personal affiliations with, so I probably am not the best person to speak in that regard, other than just more informal learning for communities of practice, which we greatly support in our department. But in terms of orders, I wouldn't be able to provide much on that, unfortunately.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's fine. And by the way, Geneviève, it's perfectly fair to not talk about it, because not talking about it shows that it's an important issue. So I think it's important to have that in mind, that professional orders, because I was hearing about there's a language test for nurses in Quebec. I'm pretty sure it's the same thing for other orders, but nurses specifically have to take a French exam, and because I work with English CJEPs, it's especially important to think about those things. So it's mostly to get participants to, because many of them will come back to the video to kind of think about those issues. And maybe we can move into the issue of communities of practice. As I said, it was a big part of the issue in yesterday's lab in French, that we're trying to build communities of practice, and that the recognition of badges themselves comes within that community. I tried to summarize part of Dan's point about how social networks can be part of this, how the value of a badge can be assessed a little bit like well, maybe, Dan, I should let you talk about that, but kind of to reiterate the point and bring it to communities of practice, if you don't mind. Dan?
Was that to Dan or Don?
Dan.
Oh, okay. We come out pretty similar.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that comes back to some of the points I was raising earlier, some of the concerns I've had with uses of badges that don't take into account communities of practice. You know, I should confess that I'm trained as a psychometrician, but I'm really a born-again situative theorist. I'm a pretty hardcore situative theorist, but you know, I did my postdoc at Educational Testing Service, and I'm trained in psychometrics. But I do all of my assessment work through a very strongly situative theoretical lens, and so that really focuses my attention on the consequences of any innovation for the discourses and participation in the routines of practice that I have come to believe are really the primary elements of learning. And this is behind my point I made earlier, that while I believe in high quality assessment and achievement testing, I always treat those as a sort of a peculiar, if not bizarre, but necessary element of any formal educational system. So in my work, I'm always trying, and my badges work is a little different. I haven't got another very extended program of research that badges fit nicely into, but what I always want to know, and the questions I always ask is, you know, how does the introduction of a badge system impact to use Jim G's term, the big D discourses in a particular community of practice? They always do, whether we look at that or not. If they're impacting anything, then they're going to be impacting those discourses, and so that is where I focus much of my attention. I still care deeply about sort of more conventional assessments and competencies and stuff, but theoretically and pragmatically, I treat all of those things as sort of artifacts or residue or echoes of the stuff that I really care about. I hope that was on target with your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm wondering, Charles, I see that we don't see you anymore, but if you're still online, maybe you can talk a little bit about how communities of practice fit with Ashoka, because it has kind of a community output to a certain extent, right? Your microphone is muted if you want to talk.
Yeah, so that's a it's a very interesting question, because I think we want to be a community that works together, collaborates, rather than just be an exclusive club. And I think this is where I think badges can force an interesting kind of conversation about what do we value from each other necessarily, rather than just yes, we're in this together, we're all doing similar stuff, and everyone's part of a big happy family, but like really breaking it down to what is it that we're getting from you that we want, and what is it that we're giving people that other organizations want. And I think, yeah, it does. I like the notion of the discourse, because I think it is introducing an often uncomfortable conversation that needs to happen, among the different practitioners that are in our field. And I don't think I think people resist thinking about badges, because it does open up very uncomfortable conversations about what exactly are we achieving through our education program, through our fellowship program, through our products and services. So yeah, I think it's going to. I'm using it as kind of that catalyst for very needed conversations that we need to have in our field.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Something I was trying to point out to the French lab, and I'll document it here, is that as a social scientist, one thing I tend to say about communities is that we should not forget that they have to do with a sense of belonging, which is great, but they also have to do with exclusion to a certain extent. And something that might happen might be the elitism that we try to avoid with badges as much as possible. We talked about democratization a little bit earlier, but I think there's a risk if we don't think about it. It might be easy to avoid, but there's a risk that if a badge is mediated through the same community, that it goes around in circles and it starts looking a little bit like an old boys club. I'm kind of assuming that James might have a reaction to that, just because based on your prior interactions, no?
Yeah, so where Dan was talking about being a psychometrician, in my background, I studied deconstruction. So when I hear discourse-based anything, inherently what comes to mind is kind of what is lost in the discourse, and I think that badges tend to frame those things that can be lost in our educational experiences. And kind of reclaim those things. I'll give you a personal but embarrassing example. In kindergarten, I didn't learn syllables, and I struggled mightily in foreign language because I had to count to hear syllables, right? So this is a gap in my own educational balance, and I think that badges can help rectify that. And when we talk about communities of practice, what we're doing is bringing people together in those particular gaps and fissures, as we might say, and in something specific like deconstruction, and we bring those together and we help each other with those.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
It's kind of a strange answer, but there you go.
No, it works. It works. That's part of the reason you're here, I guess. It's. By the way, because we'll be ending in just a few minutes, I must say it's fabulous to have such a diversity of people on the panel. It's I've been really impressed. The struggle is also to have different, to know who should talk about what, because we're going in very different directions. But I think it's important to at least allude to a few things and have that a little bit. Don, if you can talk a little bit, because you were asking a question about platforms for communities of practice, and I'm pretty sure that for prior learning assessment, it's interesting to think about the communities of practice as practitioners who are part of communities of practice. Right?
Yeah, I guess my notion of community of practice is one that spans technology, face-to-face, one-on-one, part of a group, helping others, lurking, doing all sorts of things, and a number of which are hard to span, I guess, and that speaks to James's Fishers and Gaps phrase. And if badges potentially, if they're portable and you can bring them with you, you can identify yourself. And I think part of what we're talking about here with community of practice is not just proving that you know something, it's affiliating yourself with something, it's showing you have an interest in something, or one of the things that Serge Rave goes on about is basically saying maybe it's something you want to know about, and you want to badge that, and it's a way of attracting people to you. I often have this fantasy at a conference. Wouldn't it be great if we could have an electronic badge on our lapel that would be space and proximity sensitive, and so things would light up, and you would see, oh, here's somebody I can talk to about X. You know, I think that would be awesome, because too often you end up with other ways of interacting, and a lot of it's very accidental.
Absolutely, and it's good that you bring up Serge Ravet, because a large part of his influence on the French lab has been very different from what we've done in this English lab. I think we've talked about very different issues, so that's interesting. I think we will create a document that will combine the two. My colleague Christophe Revert and myself will create a document that will combine the two labs. So I think it will be useful to think about those badges are actually for aspirational in a way, what you want to learn, and also part of identity. I mentioned, I don't remember who mentioned it before, but there was this post by Carla Casilli about macro badging and those kind of unimportant badges that are part of a fuller profile. So I think it's important for people to understand, especially if, as we come from the outside, we're not part of the badging world so much, that we think about badges as filling in so many different needs, and that they can actually be about, well, I've learned to do this and I can show you some evidence, but in some cases is basically not a badge of honor, but actually just like I'm badging myself as identifying myself as a member of this this group, and if they accept me, that can be part of it. But it's also just about what we want to be as members. So I think we can wrap up by going one by one, if you would, and sharing any kind of again, recommendation, suggestion, advice, or questions for the future, like asking participants to go further into the future, projecting themselves into what can be done, either about badges themselves or everything else that we've been discussing, which is actually pretty large. It's about assessment, it's about identity, it's about the connection with industry, it's about so many things. So feel free to say a few words about what participants can do, because since this is recorded and will be available, it will be very useful to have that as a document of what can be said in the future. So let's start with April.
Sure. I've very much enjoyed the conversation today and around badging as community of practice. I think that's fascinating, and I haven't done much reading on those connections, although I have separately on the topics. I think one of the issues around badging that I tend to come up with quite a bit is that badges continue to be seen as non-essential. They're the extra, they're the nice to have. If you have time, great, but if not, that's the first thing that's going to fall off the plate. And I think that the implication for us in the badging community is the importance of more research on the topic and beyond. I think there's been a lot written on design components of badging, but I think moving on to now, when we're implementing badges, what can we document and research regarding the motivation, the results, the effects of badging, the use in the community and industry partners, and even if they're small-scale pilots, can we start writing white papers and research papers on these topics, so we start getting the literature out there, so that we can all point to each other and show, see, look, it's not just me. We know that we have a community, but sometimes referencing in our workplace, in the traditional settings that we're in, can be difficult, and I think that would be very important.
And Dan, maybe that could be a good segue.
Sure, I'll add on that and say that yeah, the big takeaway is don't issue badges that earners don't care about. You know, if your claim rates are low, you have a problem. You know, we've seen some remarkably low claim rates. That should be a sign to people that maybe those badges are superfluous, and maybe or that they didn't do enough to make those badges valuable to their earners. And also just to amplify April's wonderful point, yes, we need more research. We need to have practical research. I think it's really exciting that, you know, we're a very diverse group, and we're sitting here, and badges provide this sort of what anthropologists call the boundary objects, which allow some concerns and some insights to travel meaningfully across some pretty large boundaries in practice. And so I think we should all celebrate that, and I would like to also say thank you to Alex for getting this together and making this possible. I think that I think we should just stop and think about that for a section. You know, how easily he was able to put together this really productive set of interactions over time, over this somewhat modest, seemingly modest innovation. So I'm really excited by the way that sort of practical wisdom and insight seems to be assembling and circulating and accruing so readily. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was actually almost effortless to get people together. That was really wonderful. And as an anthropologist, that I care not only about boundary objects and contact zones and all of those great things, but to have this kind of diversity in a panel, which is really wonderful. Charles, some parting words, some lessons you would like people to gain?
I guess it's just it's more just sharing how my own thinking has evolved, and I mean, I'm excited about all the different uses of badges, from mapping learning to motivating learning. But I think in terms of what I feel the badging movement really needs, especially for it to take hold in various communities of practice, is the notion of badges as credentials and micro-credentials. And so I think I'm turning my attention more and more to how it's used for that purpose, and helping organizations, including nonprofits and businesses and others, to think about credentials that are issued as the badges that are issued as credentials and being used as credentials. Mm-hmm. Really getting to that goal as quickly as we can, because I mean, there's so many ways we can badge what we do, and help bring learners along. But at the end of the day, I think they need to take it somewhere and show it to someone. And is that happening? And what is it going to take for that to happen? So, so I'm focusing on that as a big question, and also just how do we tell stories in the early days of badging that can really help people understand the potential, the use, and the real value of it.
Absolutely. Avery?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for being invited into this conversation and getting to listen to everyone, because it's been really great for me. In terms of what I see, I have a little bit of a one-track mind. I think about serious games all the time, probably too much, and I just believe that there is really too much to gain from the use of serious game, the development of serious games. Really, our only obstacle right now is distribution. We're trying to get these into schools. We're trying to get people to use them. We have really great games that are ready to be used. It's just a question of, what people are using, how they're using it. Is it tablet or what? And once we can break that barrier down, and once distribution becomes easier, and I know everyone's going to say App Store, App Store, App Store, but the App Store is not that easy if you know anything about it. So I think once you see something where the distribution becomes easier, you're going to start to see an amazing influx of really great games, because the technology is there to make great games, and the ideas are there. And I think once you see all these great games come in there, I think the conversation about badges will become a lot more clear for people, in the sense that I can show my my learning through this game, and I can apply it, and I can then achieve something in the game that is really demonstratable to an employer, to a school, to a teacher, and it will, I think, will propel the conversation forward more quickly. So I'm all about serious games, and please allow them into your schools and test them and trial them and even buy them. I know it's hard in the 21st century to buy things, but it's a good thing to spend a little bit of money on serious games. So thank you.
Thanks. Val?
Yeah, so I would also like to echo a lot of the sentiments that have people that have mentioned things before me, and I think this has been a great opportunity. What a great use of technology, and the fact that we can all come together like this is really, I feel, quite revolutionary, so I'm really proud to be a part of that. I would also like to chime in and echo what Charles had mentioned about the importance of, I guess, measuring the impact. That's something that we're constantly kind of striving for, and being sort of inside a machine where I can see the impact and trying to measure that really is, people are going to say, if I have a badge, how is that going to be, how is that measured? And it's like, well, did they get a job opportunity because of it? Did they get some kind of benefit and some kind of other, that's how it's translated. It's like that these badges resulted in some kind of opportunity, really. So seeing that evolve is going to be really interesting, I think, and really just keeping that sort of vision very clear and doing things exactly like this, finding out what other people are doing and what is working well, and keeping that constant communication going so that we can help each other with the knowledge that we gain along the way. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. James?
So for those who know me, you know I'm probably going to end on some abstract note, so I'll be quick with it. I think that the interaction between the individual and the community was very helpful in this discussion, amongst others. And it occurs to me that in every generation you have to kind of redefine the individual and the community and what that means. And I think it's very easy to fall into this trap of having fixed notions of what that means. And when I think that that's actually has to be recreated. And in our time, that digitalization, that connectivity, internet at large is kind of how we have to redefine our place as individuals within communities and what that means. And for me, digital badges are one of the ways that we are concretely doing that. With evidence, with data, with assessments, with everything that we've talked about, it helps us get closer to that question. So it's not so much that we're just asking this abstract question of redefining the individual and the community and how that works in our time, but badges are a way of actually being able to do that concretely. So kind of the concluding question on my end is sort of, how do we do that? How do we move forward with that? And thank you very much for having me participate.
Yeah, and it actually ends with something concrete. Well, that's okay. Geneviève?
Yeah, well, same as everyone, thank you very much for inviting me. It was not only interesting, it was extremely useful for the work that we're doing right now. And the things I'll be looking for, definitely research. I'm looking forward to having some solid research on the topic. And what interests me the most, I tried to write some notes because I'm not sure it's going to make a lot of sense, but it's this idea that there can be a common language to define people's skills and competencies, and that people can have a lot more freedom to create their own pathways and to reinvent themselves and to recreate themselves and to pursue the avenues that they want, and that recognition won't only come from an educational institution that's been established for years, and it will be easier for people who previously could not easily be recognized for all the things they can do to actually gain that recognition.
Thanks. Don?
Well, I was just putting up a link to the Design Principles card deck because I was having a lot of fun going through that last week. And I want to highlight a couple of them, and one of them is, can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So involve students at a granular level. In other words, collaborative design. The other one I want to emphasize is this one, which is make sure there is some outside value, which I think That's right. It does look familiar. So make sure there's some outside value there. I think it's great the work that Dan and his group have done looking at the sort of a semi-ethnographic analysis of 30 projects and looking for the commonalities, because these things, when they're not there, they definitely, there are issues with the badge system. The final thing I would say, and that is to echo something that Serge has talked about, which is the idea of having pathways. The pathways are better not as prescribed pathways because there's more than one way to a destination. This is picking up on what we were talking about earlier. I think if you can set up pathways where you can have any number of alternative routes to get there, just as you look at alternative routes on a Google map when you're trying to get from point A to point B, take this highway, take that road, etc., and there are different things to be gained from taking those different routes. And I think the actual granular, simple nature of open badges can really help with that, especially if we have ways of advertising the potentialities of those badges in more automatic ways.
Nice. And there's a lot of talk these days about empowering learners of any kind. It's not just about students in our colleges. It's really about empowering learning as a whole. So I really thank everyone who's been involved in one way or another. Some people have been involved in ways that were not so obvious. Some people have been more involved, more explicitly. But one thing is that I know it's just the beginning of something. I know it's trite to say so, but I really think so. I really think this this whole lab, because it's recorded, because the documentation that has been created together, the collaborative document, has been, you know, extending itself a little bit. I'll clean it up a little bit, but also I'll do a summary, a synthesis, and obviously if some of you write up anything about from those lab sessions or from anything else that might be relevant for our participants, we'll put them on the on our site. And obviously, since it basically went from coast to coast, well, we didn't get anyone from the Maritimes, I guess. But anyway. We had participants from, well, guests from different parts of Canada. That's in itself wonderful. I hope it can contribute to BadgeCan, as the hashtag goes. Canadians doing badging projects can hook up together in different ways, and it's been wonderful to have people from outside as well, obviously, including the US and Australia, and for the French lab also from France. So I think there's something just getting started. So do keep in touch. If you're watching this and it's you know, years from now or something like that, you can still go to vteducation.org to do a search for badges at that point. Maybe it will be digging through the archives, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to connect in ways that will be useful. So thanks again, everyone, and it's been really a very powerful experience for me, and I'm speaking for the whole staff at La Vitrine that it's been a very, very great experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.